Good morning. In this video today, we're going to cover some basic techniques for sampling audio output from your computer without using a microphone, taking that audio sample and putting it into Ableton, dividing it into sections so you can find the sections that you like and then take those selections from your original audio sample and make a sample pack of smaller samples that you can put in your user library in Ableton or upload to Dropbox and share with your friends. To give you an example of a finished sample pack, I'll pull up one that I made last night and then go through the process of creating a sample pack with a different sample so you can see how to create a sample pack. So here is a sample pack that I finished. In the movie Kill Bill, there's a fight scene between this girl named Go-Go and the main character. And I sampled that scene and came up with this sample pack. It's 33 samples. Play a couple of them so you get an idea of what I mean when I say sample pack. And here's one. Swords.
I know you feel you must protect your mistress. But I beg you, walk away.
Yeah, so you get a pretty good idea of what I mean when I say I sampled that scene and created a sample pack from the original sample into small usable samples. So that transformation from the original file into these smaller samples that are organized into a sample pack is what we'll cover today in this video. But for starting off, you'll want to learn how to sample computer output without using a microphone. I covered this in another video, so if you already know how to do this, or if you already have another technique, feel free to skip ahead in the video. But this is from start to finish how you can make a sample pack. So if you go to Google, type in I show you audio capture, just like it's spelled here. This page will come up as the first link. You'll download the installer and run the installer on your computer. You'll need to grant some permissions to the app developer to install the software, but if you need more help with installing this plugin, you can find tutorials about how to do that on YouTube. But it's not a very complex installation. Once you have that software installed, then you'll open up Audio MIDI Setup. I covered some of this stuff in another video, but I'm going to take you from start to finish about how to create a pretty polished sample pack so that when you open your user library in Ableton, you'll see something organized like this with all the samples from the original sample broken into smaller sections that you can really use, like a chef would use the ingredients prepared by a prep cook. So you do the prep work, but then you also get to play the role of chef in organizing your samples into a song or an arrangement. So here's one example of a sample pack that's been completed. Here's another example of a sample pack that I made from the Crash Bandicoot video game with samples in my library. They're all WAV files, so it's pretty organized. So I'm going to take you through the process about how to create an organized sample pack like this in your user library in Ableton. But as I was saying, after you download the iShowU audio capture program and install it, you'll open up Audio MIDI Setup. Press this little plus arrow here and press Create Multi-Output Device. Once you press Create Multi-Output Device, this will come up, this multi-output device on this device menu. Make sure it's highlighted and then press the Use checkbox on Built-in Output and on iShowU Audio Capture, and press Drift Correction on Built-in Output. After you've done that, right-click this device and press Use this device for sound output. I already have it selected, so I don't have that as an option in this menu, but you will want to select that multi-output device that you've created as the device being used for sound output. After you do that, you want to open up a source file like a YouTube video or maybe something on Netflix or SoundCloud that you want to sample, and then make sure that that is playing. I'll pull up something for an example. Let's see, YouTube clip. So I want to sample this Yu-Gi-Oh file. I'll open up the YouTube video. And then I'll open up QuickTime Player, press File, New Audio Recording, and press this little down arrow next to the record button, and make sure iShowU Audio Capture is selected. Go ahead and press record, and then play the file that you want to sample.
Long ago, when the pyramids were still young, Egyptian kings played a game of great and terrible power. But these shadow games erupted into a war that threatened to destroy the entire world, until a brave and powerful pharaoh locked the magic away. Imprisoned.
So then you'll have a sample of whatever you sampled.
Terrible power. But these shadow games erupted into a war that threatened to destroy the entire world.
And you can save that file, and then we'll open that file in Ableton and chop it up or slice it up into smaller samples, and then we'll go through that process next. So save that file that you sampled, and then we'll go into Ableton. So that's how you capture system output, right? That's how you capture computer output without using a microphone. So next, I'm going to Ableton, and I'll pull up a sample. Well, first you want to go into Instruments and drag a simpler instrument into a MIDI track. Then go into your user library or wherever you saved that QuickTime Player file that you recorded. I'm going to use this Yakuza fight scene from Kill Bill, and it's a pretty long sample. I think it's like 7 minutes, so it'll be helpful to be able to slice it up into smaller sections and sample the parts that I like. So take your recording from QuickTime and drag it into this simpler instrument. Then press slice mode and slice by region. Make the regions the maximum number of regions, and I'm going to be using push to sample this file. You may have a different way of sampling, but this is the way that I'm going to cover in this video. Once I set the regions to 64, which is the maximum number of regions that you can divide a sample in simpler into when you're slicing by region, then that original sample clip is sectioned out into 64 sections, and each of those sections or regions is assigned to one of these buttons on push. So when I press the first button, well, it goes like this, all the way up, and then starts over, and that's the full sample. So I'll start in the beginning, and we'll break this up into a sample pack.
Yeah, I kinda did.
Silly rabbit.
Tricks are for kids.
Using this nudge function, I can adjust the start of the sample that I have selected, and that way I can select the sample that I want to add to my sample pack.
Silly rabbit.
Tricks are for kids.
Silly rabbit. Silly rabbit.
Tricks are for kids. Yeah.
Silly rabbit.
Tricks are for kids.
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 Alright, so once you have a usable section of your sample that you want to sample, you can press record on a scene in session view and then launch the clip. And I want to make sure the volume is set to 0 decibels in your simpler instrument, and also that warp is turned off. So once you have that done,
Silly rabbit.
Tricks are for kids.
sounds good, it's usable, so I'll record.
Silly rabbit.
Tricks are for kids.
And I can go through the whole sample this way, and I'm planning on it. One thing to keep in mind is these are MIDI clips of this simpler instrument, which we will later freeze and flatten to make audio files that we can save as a sample pack. But this MIDI note that was recorded this way is assigned to this region of this simpler instrument. So if I change the end point of this region, then the sample is going to be altered when I freeze and flatten, and I won't get the original sample that I selected. So it's important to not change the start and ends of the regions of the sample that you already have recorded as samples you want to use in your sample pack. But we can go through the sample this way. If this isn't a process you want to watch, you can skip ahead to the end of the video, or skip ahead in the video to get to how to move forward in this process of creating a sample pack. But feel free to watch me chop this up if you want to. And once you get to 8 scenes in this, you'll press Command I a bunch of times and you can enter more scenes into your session view. At this point in making sample packs, you pretty much just want to make sure that the cutoff of the regions that you're recording isn't right in the middle of a sound that you want to use in your sample pack, because you can duplicate the regions once you freeze and flatten the MIDI notes into audio files. When I say you can duplicate them, I mean that you can select multiple parts of the same audio file, which is basically a recording of a region of the larger sample, to create many smaller samples, especially if there's lots of parts of a small part of time that you want to use as samples. This part of the process is not really that important for getting your samples just right. You can fine tune later, but you just want to make sure that the cutoff between the regions isn't gonna be right in the middle of a sound that you want to use in your sample pack. So I kind of think of this process as combing through a sample with like a fine tooth comb. You can really get some usable chunks out of a larger sample by going through samples this way. It takes a little while, but I think the result is usually worth it. And this is an example of a clip that has a bunch of sword slices in it that I want to use as like maybe like 5 different samples. So rather than change the regions, I'll just split it up into smaller sections later. Honestly, you can split up a sample um, uh, without using this region feature of push and the nudge wheel, but it's the way that I prefer to sample. And this is just one example of when a small section of audio contains lots of usable samples, and rather than adjust the region length with 5 different region markers, it's just easier to record the one and break it up later. And just make sure that the region markers aren't in the middle of a sound that you'd want to use in your pack. That's pretty much the guideline as far as setting region markers go, and this phase of making a sample pack.
This is what you get for fucking around with Yakuzas! Go home to your mother! This is what you get for fucking around with Yakuzas! Go home to your mother! Is what you get for fucking around with Yakuzas! Go home to your mother! other.
Alright, so that is a sample pack starting point. Um, you go right click on this device, on this track. It's 28 samples we got to start with. So right click, press freeze track. I'll break some of these samples up into multiple samples, so we'll end up with a sample pack with more than 28 files. But this is a good starting point. As you can see, the size of these regions changed dramatically from being distributed evenly in terms of range of length of the sample region. And then after you've frozen that, press right click again and press flatten. So you'll do freeze, then flatten. That'll convert all these MIDI files into audio files. And now we can go in and edit these into wave files, and the wave files will compose your sample pack, or comprise your sample pack. A second, change this. Layout of what's being captured. Alright, don't need to push screenshot anymore. Anyway, here's the first one.
Silly rabbit.
Tricks are for kids.
Alright, so when you freeze and flatten the MIDI files into audio files, the samples that are created, the wave files that are created, are actually, well, there's the same sample played twice, so you'll have to shorten the loop length a little bit and adjust it to be just the loop that you want to use as your sample.
Silly rabbit.
Tricks are for kids.
Silly rabbit.
And you probably want to rename these as we go along, so you have names for your samples in your sample pack. And after you select the loop length, you want to right click and press crop sample. this is an example of a time that I want to use more than one sample from the clip. So press Command I and insert a few scenes, and then Command D, which will duplicate that clip into the new scenes. I can just crop these down. So I ended up taking 3 samples from that one. So an example of a sound effect that I could probably use is a part of drum kits. I'm not exactly sure when I'll use all of these samples, but when I'm building a sample pack, I kind of assume that I won't be the only one who uses it, and these aren't very large files, so even if I have them in my library and I don't get around to using them, it's not really taking up a lot of space on my hard drive.
This is what you get for fucking around with Yakuzas! Go, mother! You get for fucking around with Yakuzas! Go home to your mother! This is what you get for fucking around with Yakuzas! Go home to your mother! This is what you get for fucking around with Yakuzas!
Alright, so that is 30 samples. I'm going to make sure they're all correct before there's a few little mess. Before I move into the organizational part of this sample pack, just want to make sure that all these samples are correct. Alright, so at this point, I'm going to save the live set, save as, and delete the temporary files, yes, and I'm just going to go ahead and press collect all and save everything except for factory packs. We didn't use anything from factory packs, but collect all and save. Then I'll open up Finder, go into the project that I just saved, go into samples, processed, crop, and I'm gonna go ahead and just delete all these ASD files, because I'm gonna delete this project after I create the sample pack and just have these samples as a sample pack in my user library. And I want to be able to view all of these samples so I can make it nice and orderly. These ASD files are in the way of that, so delete them. And then arrange by name, or no, clean up by name. And some of these files didn't get named what I wanted them to be named, so I'm going to go ahead and rename some of them just for the final organizational process of making a sample pack. Alright, and just for organization, I'm gonna delete these timestamps after the track names. But this is the last phase of making the sample pack, and you get to see the entire process of recording computer output into a sample file, then breaking that sample into smaller pieces using push and the region or slice by region function of simpler, and then the conversion of the MIDI notes of the simpler instrument into with freeze and flatten audio files, then the cropping and naming of those audio files, then the organization of those cropped samples into, well, an organized sample pack of smaller wave files, dot wave files, and that pretty much covers a pretty crucial method of sampling computer outputs and making a usable sample pack with the computer output that you sample. Hope this video has been helpful. It goes more in depth than the last sampling video that I made from start to finish, not just a short explanation without the full application of the technique. Now 7 more samples and I'll have a fully functioning sample pack. And I will upload this sample pack to Dropbox, and I'll put a link to the Dropbox file or folder in the description below the video, so you can download this Cabal sample pack if you'd like to. The last part of this sample pack process is I'm going to take this crop folder, I'm going to rename it whatever I want the sample pack to be called. Call it the Yakuza Fight Scene Sample Pack. Okay. Then I'm going to drag this folder into my user library of Ableton. User library, samples, put it right here next to my other sample packs. You might organize your samples in a different way, but this ended up being 58 megabytes of samples, 30 items. and I'm going to take the original file, the one that we recorded in QuickTime, and delete it. And I'm also going to delete the Ableton project from my live recordings folder because I don't need it anymore. And now I'll show you that you can open up Ableton, go into your user library, go into samples, and the Yakuza Fight Scene sample pack that we just made is right here in the library, ready for use. I hope this video tutorial has been helpful. Again, I'll put the sample pack in the description below the video. But thanks for tuning in.